Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach and developmental editor and host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for writers who have finished or almost finished writing their manuscripts and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. For more about the way that I support writers, you can check out the links in the comments section. But today, what I want to talk about is crafting a scene or revising a scene that moves your story forward in a meaningful way. Oftentimes, when writers come to talk to me about something that's not working in their novel or their memoir, they're talking about scenes that aren't moving their story forward. The easiest way to think about revising a scene is to think about what your scene is supposed to accomplish. And I have a list of a few of those things right here. These are really the main jobs of a good, strong scene. First off, a scene usually advances causality. And what I mean by that is it moves your story forward in some fundamental way. If you want to test to see if a scene has causality, try taking it out. Read the story again without that scene. Does it make sense or does it leave the reader confused? If your scene can be pulled out without any impact on the novel whatsoever or the memoir, it means that that scene does not have causality. It doesn't lead from A to B to C to D. Another task or another role that a good scene plays is it's a shift in a story's value. So that might mean a character who feels safe suddenly feels like they're in danger. A character who was once trusting suddenly has reason to feel doubt, right? So suddenly, where your character's perspective is coming from has taken a shift because of something that has happened in that scene. A good scene also tends to change the reader's knowledge in some way because in reading that scene, something has been revealed to the reader. They are being misled, perhaps. Maybe they have new information, but maybe they're being misled. Maybe some red herrings have been thrown in there. Or maybe some assumptions that the reader is holding are confirmed or misproved or any number of different things. But in some way, the reader's understanding of what's happening has been altered by that scene. And the last thing I look for in a scene is an increased constraint, meaning suddenly your characters have fewer options. Their world is kind of closing in on them. There are some kinds of obstacles, hurdles that are going to encounter in a scene that makes their situation more dire. Or perhaps opens it up. Perhaps you're closer to the end of the story, and suddenly there are more options available to your character because of something that has happened in the scene. So, this is by no means to say every scene is going to contain all four of these elements, but these are elements to test for when you feel like a scene is not quite landing where you hoped it would. So, I'm going to talk today about a 4-point test that you can run on your scenes to decide if they are working or not. First test is, does a scene turn? What do I mean by that? I'm not suggesting that a good scene means something happens. Oftentimes, we equate a good scene with action or a new plot point, and that's not exactly what I mean here. Does it turn means that there has been that value shift we just talked about, right? Where we go from safety to danger, from ignorance to knowledge, from control to vulnerability, connection to some kind of a rupture of some sort. Something in your character's life has taken a turn and now everything is different. If a scene ends where it started, in terms of these kinds of values, in terms of where your character is coming from on a particular point, then it is structurally inert. You have not made a turn. So we're going to use Little Red Riding Hood for our mentor text today. Let me show you what I mean when I say there's been no turn. In this made-up scene, Little Red Riding Hood is walking through the forest. She's picking flowers. She's enjoying her day. The sun is shining. There's no wolf in sight. At the very beginning of this scene, the value is she is safe. And at the very end of the scene, oh, she's still safe. So she is starting out safe at the beginning of the scene, and she is feeling safe at the end of the scene. So that simply means there's been no turn. Nothing has changed in her orientation to the world at this moment. Everything began well, everything stays that way. Now, in a stronger version of the same scene, she starts out picking flowers, feeling really safe, feeling great, when suddenly she meets the wolf. The value at the beginning is safety. At the end, she is being threatened. Now, she may not know she is being threatened. In this story, she does not know because he tries to befriend her, but we know. We have a sense because we recognize who that wolf is in most fairy tales, right? He's usually not a very nice guy. And we start to get an unsettled feeling because we know more than Little Red Riding Hood knows at this point. That is a turn. The second test that you can run your scene through is there a clear scene spine? Scene is stronger when it has particular building blocks that we're going to go through in a minute. And then we can think about those when they're piled one on top of another as forming the spine of your story. So the first thing that we want to look for is a goal. What does the character want right now? What is the obstacle that's blocking that? And what is the outcome? What happens because of that obstacle and your character's clashing with it? If you can't name these things, the scene is going to often drift into mood rather than having kind of a propulsive movement forward. And what I mean about mood is, of course, establishing mood is really important in your story. That's just, I love a story with good mood. But what I mean by that is you're sort of evoking some feelings. It's sort of atmospheric. We're getting deeper into the character's world. And there's something very meaningful and important about that. But we want to recognize when that is the case because too many scenes that focus on that element and don't really have a clear spine. That's when you start to lose momentum in a story. When a story feels a little flat, you feel like you're not really sure where you're going with it. That's often because the focus hasn't been on those building blocks that a good spine scene contains. So in our mentor text, we have a scene in which Red meets the wolf. Her goal, of course, is to get to her grandmother's house. The obstacle is that Wolf comes out and delays her and questions her. He wants to know where she's going. He wants to know how she's going to get there. And of course, he does all of this in a very charming way as he works to befriend her and gain her trust. The outcome of this is that Red reveals where she's going. And the moment she does that, she becomes vulnerable. She doesn't know it, but we do, and we begin to feel, as readers, unsettled. The result we know is that Wolf has the upper hand. He has the advantage. Test 3. Does the scene escalate the story's pressure? Escalation does not mean more action, right? Sometimes, I mean, action's great in a certain kind of story, but it's not the only thing, and it's not what makes a scene strong. Escalation is all about greater risk, higher cost to your character, fewer exit possibilities, right? Red's world is getting smaller and smaller because the wolf is starting to kind of work his way with her. And so it's going to become more and more difficult for her to realize what's going on and to escape him. She becomes closer, there's a closer proximity to danger or whatever it is that's undesirable in this character's path. And the consequences become more and more irreversible. That your character is getting deeper and deeper into trouble. That's how we ramp up the pressure in a good scene. Ask yourself, if the scene disappeared, would the story still get tighter? Would the tension still rise? It's the scene's job to really put on that pressure on your character and on what's happening to them. So in Red Riding Hood, we can call this an escalation ladder. It starts with Mother's warning, saying, stay on the path. She knows that her daughter is going out into the forest. It can be dangerous. So stay on the path at all cost. But then the wolf comes along and he exploits a clear weakness that he recognizes in Red, and that is she is persuadable. So he is able to sweet talk her, and he ends up giving her bad directions to her grandmother's house, telling her it's a detour and it's a shortcut. In actuality, it elongates her trip quite a bit, and that gives him time to go to the grandmother's house and put his plot into motion. Because of this, grandmother's safety completely goes away. She's in peril, as is Red. Each step forward is reducing Red's options more and more and more and at an increasing cost. And that is how we see this scene escalate and how in turn it escalates everything that's happening in the entire story. Test 4. Does a scene create a new problem? Remember, that's our job as writers, is to give our characters many, many problems. Strong scenes don't only deliver information, they generate consequences. That is, write that down, put that on a sticky note at your desk. You're all about generating consequences for your characters to respond to. So a good scene will oftentimes end with a new complication, a new question, a new vulnerability, a new commitment that is going to cost your character something very precious. These are the ways that we really create more interest and more agony for those in our stories. So in Red Riding Hood, the complication, of course, is Red tells the wolf where she's going. That creates a new problem. That gives the wolf an idea for a new plan. Grandma becomes vulnerable, and Red's journey becomes a race. This scene generates the next scene. And of course, that next scene is when Red gets finally arrives at her grandmother's house, tired, a little bit freaked out from having taken the long way to her grandmother's house. And there's Granny in bed, not looking too good, looking a little different than she expected. So now we know how to think about building a good scene, a solid scene. If you have those key elements that we've just discussed in your scene, you've got a good shot at writing something very compelling. But what if you've already written the story and something's not quite right about it? There's the middle kind of sags or some boring parts that you're not really happy with. Then it becomes a question of what do you cut and what do you keep and fix, right? These are the big questions that plague us when we are at the revision stage. So when we cut a scene, and it doesn't necessarily mean it goes in the garbage, right? By all means, save it somewhere because it may come in handy later. Or you may decide, and this is often the case, hey, I wrote this for a reason. There's some good stuff in here. What if I merge it with this other scene? That is often what I recommend, depending on a number of different things, but oftentimes merging a flat scene with a more robust scene will accomplish what you're looking for. But sometimes the scene really does have to go. These are some of the questions to ask. If your scene has no value shift, that's a problem. We don't want to start and end in the same place in most instances. If there's no causal necessity, if you took that scene out and no one noticed, it probably doesn't need to be there. Oftentimes, you'll have a scene that really works, but it's already in your book somewhere else. You're saying the same thing, you're moving the same idea forward, just in a different scene. And typically, an editor will point that out and recommend moving one of those scenes. Resolution without complication. In other words, when there's when a character doesn't have to earn whatever it is whatever kind of resolution they get, that can be really frustrating. That's when people complain about, oh, the ending was too happy. It was tied up in a red bow. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's just too neat and tidy, and not everyone loves that kind of story. But oftentimes, a reader will not object to that kind of happy ending in one story, and they will object to it in another. And what they're really saying isn't, I don't like happy endings. They're saying, I didn't believe this happy ending. This was too easy. And what that comes from is not having enough scenes where you had complications that the characters had to work through. Sometimes the spine exists, but it's just blurry. It hasn't been fleshed out enough. And that's as simple as going back and just really putting a fine point on the different elements of the spine of that scene. Sometimes the turn is just too small, and we want to ramp that up a little bit more. Sometimes the outcome is too convenient. There's our pretty red bow analogy where we don't believe it. It's not been earned. And sometimes the scene needs a sharper consequence. Most scenes aren't bad, they're just under pressured. Remember, your job as a writer, it's hard sometimes, but your job as a writer is to throw all kinds of hard stuff at your characters, at these beloved people you've created. It's your job to make their lives as difficult as possible so that they have amazing things to overcome. Four ways that I recommend strengthening a weak scene is one, to sharpen that goal, make it specific and urgent. Your reader will be better able to invest and feel empathy and feel excited and nervous and all the things you want them to feel as they're reading a scene that you've crafted. Strengthen that obstacle if it doesn't feel big enough. Include more active resistance. Don't lean in so heavily on ambiance and on all the other things that you've woven into that scene. Really, really take a look at that obstacle and try to ramp up what's happening there. Increase the cost. Make your character's success expensive, right? If they make this decision, what do they lose? That can be very compelling to write about. And change the outcome. If the scene feels too flat, change the outcome. Make it messier. In Red Riding Hood, the fix is not prettier prose. It is all about, what does the wolf gain? What does Red lose? And believe me, I love beautiful prose. It's probably my favorite thing in the world, but it's not the secret to your scene's success. The secret to a scene's success when we're talking about the architecture of the scene is definitely thinking about these four elements where we're really applying more pressure to your characters, to their lives, and just putting in more obstacles for them to navigate. So the key takeaways, if you apply these four tests, you can stop guessing. One of the things that I really try to do when I work with my clients is eliminate guesswork. There are some really simple tools you can use, some simple questions you can ask yourself to drill down and figure out what's not working and exactly how you can fix it. So look at every scene in your story and ask, does it turn? Does it have a spine? Does it escalate? Does it generate consequence? And if it does these things, you have a scene that's working. If you found this video helpful, I would be so grateful if you would hit like and subscribe. I will be dropping more videos like this every Tuesday. Send me a question. I might wind up in a video as well. And finally, I would just like to tell you about Story Circle. This is my free weekly writing sprint where I invite writers to come together on Zoom and we write together for an hour. This is every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern. And you can keep the camera on, you can keep the camera off. You can come for the whole time, you can come for half. We're super casual. It's just a chance to get together and write in community. It is one of the highlights of my week. I love it, and I would love to see you there. So for more information, check out the link that I'll put in the comments section, and please join us when you can. All right, happy writing.